Welcome to GrassRoot, Ohio. Conversations with everyday people working on important issues here in Columbus and all around Ohio. I'm Carolyn Harding, and today I'm talking with Ferner and Markie Miller, advocates and activists for the health and well-being of Lake Erie. Ferner is a coordinator of Lake Erie Advocates, a grassroots citizens group that educates and organizes to build awareness and public pressure to stop the assault on Lake Erie by factory farms and other polluters. He lives with Sue Carter, his wife of 35 years, and an ever-changing number of cats, with Lake Erie as their front yard in Toledo. Markie Miller is a volunteer organizer for Toledoans for Safe Water and the Ohio Community Rights Network. She's an ambassador for the Lake Erie Bill of Rights and the rights of nature, speaking at the United Nations, appearing on The Daily Show, and numerous local, national, international media outlets. Mike, I just read your August 27 article in Counterpunch, quote, as titled, "There is no fixing this industry, the third battle for Lake Erie," with a visual of a huge billboard saying, "Lake Erie is not a toilet." Markie, you and Julian Mack were my first GrassRoot Ohio guests 2.5 years ago, just after the Toledo citizens voted to enact the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So our objectives are the same: a clean, safe, healthy lake. So with everything that has gone on since that day, what have we learned and what are our new tactics to protect Lake Erie on our North Shore? Mike, tell us a little bit about Lake Erie Advocates.
Well, thank you, Carolyn. We got started in late 2015, which was about 1.5 years after Toledo's water crisis, which was when close to 500,000 people didn't have water from the city for almost 3 days because of toxic algal bloom on Lake Erie. So our group got organized, and there had been environmentalists talking about Lake Erie and doing a variety of things to try to bring it back to health. But we thought that we wanted to have a more in-your-face kind of organization that was going to confront public officials and name names and take a little tougher stand, because it didn't look like much was going on that was going to really start helping the lake. So anyway, we got going, and since then we have picketed dozens of times at various events and at various public officials gatherings. We have done the standard phone calling and writing to elected officials, hundreds of calls and postcards and emails and so forth. We had a committee for a couple of years that talked to every state legislator in our region. We've been involved in a lawsuit for the last 4 years to try to get the US EPA to enforce the Clean Water Act. And all of these things, and I should mention, a couple of years ago, we worked with Toledoans for Safe Water to support and help get the passage of the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. That was Toledoans for Safe Water's initiative and Markie's group, but our group was very supportive, and our members learned a lot during that campaign. All of which we've seen not make a difference at all in Lake Erie's health. In fact, it's worse now than it was 5 years ago, because the state continues to license more and more of these factory farms, in quote, because they're not farms. And so there's just more and more animals in our watershed, and their waste is continuing to eventually reach Lake Erie. So our group recently came to the conclusion that there isn't any fixing this industry, that the only thing that makes sense is to get rid of it. And we know that's not going to happen tomorrow, but nothing changes until you start talking about it. And so we decided to do that, and we did it in a big way. We've taken out a dozen billboards in Toledo, a couple in Columbus, a couple in Cleveland that say, like the one that you mentioned, Lake Erie is not a toilet, ban factory farms. We've got various slogans. One of them said, who voted for this, with an image of animals in a factory farm. So anyway, we've been continuing to do that, and we just hope that enough people take it to heart and really, everybody says they're concerned about Lake Erie, and everybody says they want to have it restored to health, but it's going to take an awful lot more citizens getting angry and deciding that things need to change before that's going to happen.
Markie, I saw a picture of you with a sign at some protest saying that the system is fixed. We need to break the system, or something like that. Was that correct?
Right. Yep.
What did you mean by that, Markie?
Well, I think to Mike's point, we keep permitting and licensing and allowing these, animal factories and other harms to go on. And we know the dangers, we know the potential dangers, we have a measured amount of harm, and we act as though we are allowing it to happen in a reasonable, permissible rate. And we can see the collective impact happening on Lake Erie. We can see it happening in other places, and we're not taking enough action. And so we realize that activists and community members and, sometimes even elected officials are left sort of spinning their wheels and begging for change and wanting to see action. And there really isn't a good avenue for that change to happen. We're given public hearings, and we're given, oh yeah, write and call and do this, but nothing is really going to come out of that. And we understand that those permits aren't really written to protect the environment. They're not really written in a way to ease harm, but to allow it. And so we need to change the way we look at that system and understand that we can't just go in and tweak it and say, hey, we found a flaw, maybe you didn't notice. But we have to call the system out and say it's working perfectly fine for those who designed it. And that we want to break it, we want to dismantle it, and we want to build something totally new. And that's where I think Rights of Nature comes in. And both groups have been just really vocal in trying to call out when things aren't set up in a way that's meant to really protect Lake Erie or the people here.
Mike, you mentioned that the treatment of these animals in these factory farms reminded you of how war caused soldiers to do inhumane, treat others inhumanely, and that this is also impacting the workers that are working in these factory farms. Tell us how that resonates with you and what you were talking about.
Yeah, I was a hospital corpsman during the Vietnam War, and worked in a Navy hospital and took care of hundreds of guys that were coming back from Vietnam and in various stages of disassembly. So I got to see firsthand what the real effects of war are, and primarily learned that my government was lying to me and to everybody else when it argued for being in Vietnam. And it opened my eyes and made me realize that that goes on in a number of areas, not just when it related to my own experience as a Navy corpsman during the Vietnam War, but it extends to many things that the government does. And I got involved with Veterans for Peace, and came to realize that if we really are concerned as a society about our fellow citizens having PTSD and all of the personal, mental, and medical ills that result from being in the military and being in war, then we simply need to quit sending people to war, because what happens is war creates the conditions within which some people are going to do things they never thought they would be capable of doing. And it's automatic. It doesn't happen to everybody, but nobody knows, if you're going to be able to maintain your humanity, or if you're going to wind up, descending into the depths of inhumane behavior, because those conditions change you. So I started, after getting involved with Lake Erie Advocates, and I knew something about the conditions in these animal feeding factories, but it wasn't until I started watching some of the underground videotapes that were taken by people who became employees at some of these places, and for the purpose of getting film footage about what was happening. And when you see that, and you see how these animals are treated, it becomes pretty clear that these factories, these animal feeding factories, when they're built and operated, they create the conditions for inhumane treatment. And people who work in them long enough, not all of them, but some of them are going to do the same thing that men and women do when they're placed in combat. They're going to descend into a place where they do inhumane acts that they never thought they would be capable of doing otherwise, and otherwise wouldn't be doing. But it's the conditions that are created in war, and I believe the conditions that are created in these animal factories that result in inhumane treatment. And frankly, these facilities are built in such a way that they're inhumane in the first place. Even if the workers there treat them as well as possible, just the very design of these places are inhuman. But on top of that, then you get inhumane acts by some of the people who work there.
Yeah, that really hit me. That's a whole nother side to the factory farm. And, when you're thinking about Lake Erie, you're thinking about the pollution from these factory farms, but to look at the impact on the employees and on their quality of life, not to mention the inhumane conditions about these animals.
And we didn't want to go there when we got started for the first few years. We decided that, well, if we stray from the arguments around what's going on with Lake Erie and start talking about the conditions in these factory farms and for the animals and such, people are going to, we're going to get a reaction from people of, well, why are you telling me what to eat? That I got to be a vegan or something, And we wanted to keep the focus on the lake. But after doing this work for about 5 years, it became pretty clear that we needed to address the whole issue. And that's why we say there's no fixing this industry. We've got to get rid of it, and we don't need it. It didn't appear in our watershed until the mid-90s, and nobody was standing in line waiting for the hamburger delivery or the egg delivery or the milk delivery with empty shelves. That didn't happen, and we simply don't need this industry.
So let's talk about the physical impact of this industry on the Western Lake Erie watershed basin, and what exactly, how it's impacting and creating these toxic algal blooms. Markie, let's start with you.
Yeah, and Mike has more of the numbers here, but we're talking about millions of gallons of manure stored, even allowed to be accumulated and produced, and then stored, applied, discharged in whatever way that they're used, leaching into our watershed, mainly through drainage tiles, which we have, this area used to be a swamp. And so we have ways of filtering out that water, draining it, trying to keep it, turning it from this really what was considered a formidable landscape into fertile farmland. And so we have to keep that system going. And those drainage tiles end up being these little super pipeline highways that carry nutrients and raw manure into our water. Goes into the Maumee River and then goes into the western basin of Lake Erie. And with the blue-green algae that we're talking about with cyanobacteria, the microcystis can be produced mainly from the excess amounts of phosphorus, because I believe it can fix its own nitrogen. So phosphorus is considered the limiting factor. And the more that you have of that, and now you have a very shallow lake, you have a lake that's traditionally very warm and getting warmer with, climate change and the just change in seasonal conditions, a lot of rainfall coming in, snowfall, all of those things contribute to how much of a nutrient impact that we have. And on the other side, we're not doing anything to limit the nutrients going in, but we're focusing now on, well, let's wait for the blue-green algae to form, and then we'll just increase our treatment. We'll use more chemicals. We'll put millions of dollars into the facility to try and keep an eye on things. We'll have an early warning system, things like that. And there's very little focus on, well, what if we just produce less? What if we did more? What if we weren't doing the intensive livestock farming in this area like we are? Because I think, to me, that's what it comes down to. It just can't happen in this area without having a huge impact because of the landscape, because of its historical use, what it is. And we tried to come in and control it and change it. And we're living with that legacy now, and we're trying to deal with those effects. And it just that is the conversation, really, is we just can't keep this going in a way that's really going to be profitable long term, and it's not going to result in either a dead Lake Erie again, or impacting the 11 million people that rely on it for water.
So Mike, let's talk about the numbers. How many factory farms are there now? And have they grown in a great percentage in the past couple of years? Where are we at, and where are they coming from?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't until the mid to late 90s that we had any of these facilities in our watershed. Now we have over 800. This is the Maumee River is the largest river flowing into any of the Great Lakes. So, we have a big responsibility as human beings. We're supposed to be stewards of the place where we live, and we're blowing it. So just to give you a quick look at the numbers, our best estimates after really doing some digging are that there are over 25 million animals in confined facilities in our watershed. And the number is probably far greater than that, because a lot of them that are below a certain number don't even get counted. But to the best we can determine, there are over 800 of these facilities, 25 million animals confined in them. And if you look at the amount of phosphorus that these animals excrete and compare it to what human beings excrete, we have the equivalent in these 25 million animals. It's the equivalent of the human populations in Ohio, Indiana, Chicago, and Atlanta. All of those human beings, and just looking at the phosphorus that they excrete, that is the comparison. So if we had that human population, to put it politely, taking a dump in the Western Lake Erie Basin without treating it at all, that is the comparison with the number of animals that we have in these confined facilities. And it's insane, it's unsustainable. And it just, if we allow it to continue, we're going to have a dead lake, in addition to a lot of other problems.
Who's in charge of regulating these farms and permitting these farms? Who's in charge?
Well, in Indiana and Michigan, because the watershed extends a little bit into both of those states, it's the State Environmental Protection Agency. In Ohio, interestingly, the legislature transferred the authority from the Ohio EPA to the Ohio Department of Agriculture. So they officially put the fox in charge of the hen house. Even our mayor, who is hardly a radical, said that the Ohio legislature is a wholly owned subsidiary of the Farm Bureau. And that's for sure. I mean, that's who's running the show when it comes to the agricultural and environmental policies in the country, and in Ohio in particular. It's big agriculture. It's the Farm Bureau. It's the Pork Council and the Beef Council and the Dairy Council and all these lobbyists that swarm over Columbus and every other state capital and Washington, and have unlimited money to dispense and make their presence known. That's how this whole issue ties right into democracy, because there isn't any.
Sounds kind of nebulous, though. I mean, are there individuals that own these farms? Are they from the U.S.? Are they from other countries? Are they just a few people, 5 people that own all these factory farms? Some people own the hog farms, some people own the dairy farms, some people own the chicken farms. Who can we hold accountable to this?
Carolyn, I don't have a really good answer for you as far as our watershed goes. The ownership is a lot more diverse than it is in other parts of the country. For example, in North Carolina, the biggest hog producer in the country, and Smithfield owns most of the hog factories in North Carolina. China bought out Smithfield. So now China is the largest owner of hog factories in North Carolina. In our watershed, there's some of that going on, but as far as we can tell, most of the owners and operators of these facilities they started out as more traditional farmers and bought into the program that the government was putting forward and the subsidies to scale up and run these kinds of operations.
Who is the director of the Farmers Bureau right now?
I don't know. The Ohio Farm Bureau? I could look it up here in a minute, but I can't.
Look it up. Ohio Farm Bureau. It'd be good to have a name.
Yeah.
Just someone that people could contact. Now, Markie, the Lake Erie Bill of Rights was passed by the people of citizens of Toledo, and then it was attacked by a farm. Tell us what happened briefly.
Yeah, so hours after the election results came in, a lawsuit was filed against the city of Toledo in federal court to say, hey, we are an LLC. It was a grain farmer who they went and filed all the paperwork they needed, just before to say we're an LLC. So now we have standing to sue the city of Toledo, which they actually really didn't have standing, but it was okay because the state of Ohio backed that corporation, that LLC, in the lawsuit. So there was no question of standing once that happened. And the rare thing here is that the suit was filed before the law was even on the books. And it was pretty clear that was ready to go. I doubt anyone pulled an all-nighter to write a 30+ page lawsuit based on those election results. It was a plan. It was, just waiting to see if by any chance this law would pass. And we went into court. The people of Toledo were not allowed to intervene in that case. So we had no voice in that issue. And to the city's credit, they did a decent job defending the law and taking a stand. But then it came down to this farm. I can't even say farmer, this farm. It was Dravis Farms LLC coming in to say our civil rights are being violated as a business. That was their argument. And the state said, hey, we have ownership of Lake Erie. This community has no say, which we argued, well, we want to fight for stewardship, not ownership. That was the point of putting this together. And it came down to one judge saying, I side with the state, I side with the business. And it was very interesting because he ruled that LIBOR had caused harm to the state of Ohio on paper. It had caused harm to the permitting process. And, you know, even though it was hypothetical, nobody actually got to use anything or take any action. And yet we, as a community who had lost our water, who had lost that connection to Lake Erie, who people had gotten sick, had lost pets, that harm was not allowed to go on the record. That harm had no recognition in that court whatsoever. But the harm to the state on paper was very real. And later in his decision, the judge also ruled that, oh, you know, this is kind of vague. It's just a value statement, you know, it doesn't really have any teeth. So those two contradictions going on, that we caused harm, but yet we really didn't have the power to do anything. It was just any argument that could be used to get the result that they wanted. And we got that just before everything shut down with COVID. So it was February of 2020. So we got that a day and a year later after the election. But I think now it's up to people to still call that out, to say, if you see things or you hear of things, you see permits, you know, we talk about factory farms coming in or animal factories, and we can still call that out as a violation of Lake Erie's rights. It's a violation of this community's rights. Just because it's not on the books doesn't mean it isn't something we can push for and uphold. And I think that's going to be the role that we step into, and hope to see more communities take that step and say, yeah, we know the story, we know the results, we're going to do this too, because, you know, what else is our option?
Markie, when you say the state, are you talking about the governor? Are you talking about the legislature? Who is the state that supported this lawsuit?
Yeah, I mean, good question. It was just the attorney general came in and said, yeah, I'm going to represent the state of Ohio against this process. And
was that Yost?
Yes. And I'm trying to think, I know since that time, we've seen some articles come out where the Ohio Farm Bureau has taken a lot of credit for the lawsuit, for funding it, for being behind
Dorothy
it.
Polanda? Dorothy Polanda? I know she used to be as Congress, either a state senator or a state rep. And I know she's involved with the agriculture. I think it's Dorothy Polanda.
I believe she was at the time. I don't know if she's still.
He's the director of the Ohio Department of Agriculture now.
Okay. So it's not the Farm Bureau. Have you found the name of the Farm Bureau?
Yeah.
Who is it?
If people want to go to their website, it's just OFB for OhioFarmBureau.org. The president's Bill Patterson. And
Bill Patterson used to be a state legislator. I'm pretty sure. And the name is very familiar to me. So this sounds like it's just pro-capitalist business over people's rights, over community rights, over animal rights.
To put an even finer point on what some of these officials, what positions they hold now and what they used to do. A couple of years ago, the deputy director of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency resigned after a quite long career with the Ohio EPA. But before he started working for the Ohio EPA for 19 years, he was a lobbyist with the Ohio Farm Bureau. And then the director of the EPA hired him to be the deputy director. So, you know, it's all over the place and well documented who's running the show here.
Right. Okay. We have no more time, my friends. Can you give us a website so if people want more information, they can find it?
Lake Erie Advocates.org. That's the website that Markie did for us.
And for LIBOR, it's LakeErieAction.org.
All right, my friends, let's get these images out. Let's get this information out, and let's clean up Lake Erie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Thanks for joining me today. In addition to our Friday 5 p.m. broadcast on WGRN.org, GrassRoot Ohio now airs on Sundays at 2 p.m. on WSCRSFM.org and at 4 p.m. on WEJP-LP in Wheeling, Moundsville, West Virginia. You can also find us on SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Thanks for joining us. Okay, that's it, kids.